to allow time for some of you to call in, make comments, ask questions, and it makes quite often for a lively discussion. So, and of course, you may ask questions and make comments anytime you want. That's the bonus for coming to the classroom. So as we begin our time together, I invite you to close your eyes, become still, center yourselves in that living, loving presence of God. We have always free and open access to the source that is within us, the source of abundance, the source of healing, source of guidance, source of love, source of infinite good. And for a few moments in the silence, let us rest in that awareness of infinite possibilities and infinite good in the silence. Now, as we begin to return our attention to this time and this place, we give thanks that we have free and open access to that source of infinite good. We can have guidance in every moment. Whether we are in a state of turbulence or whether we are more settled, the guidance is there always to take us through whatever situation we are in. And for that awareness of the truth that sets us free, we are so grateful, and we do give thanks in the name and through the power of the Christ that lives within us all. Amen. Well, we have been looking at all these different stages of unfoldment in this saga of Elijah, which is about unfolding our own inner prophet. These are the stages we go through. Once we awaken to the possibility of something other than being merely human, we articulate to ourselves an intention, and we did that a couple of weeks ago. There was an intention, then a preparation for that intention, and later on we're going to compare the difference between that preparation, those two initial miracles of Elijah, with two after the ascension by Elisha. It's a fascinating comparison, showing how different we are after we have made contact with the source. Elijah does reach the top of the mountain after going through that very turbulent time. You can only imagine. He was fleeing from Jezebel's wrath. He reaches the top, and for those of you who've had my classes before, you will recognize this. Both the top and the bottom look the same, but they are actually not. There is a very subtle but very important difference. And if you will notice that the bottom box down here has this closed. This is closing the door to the outside world. This is what Elijah did, where he was told, go. He was inside a cave, and from there discovered that, oh, God was not in the wind that was causing all the rocks to break. God was not in the earthquake. God was not in the fire, but in the still small voice. This is really the key to the unfoldment. Here we see this door here is always open. And if you follow the arrows, when you close this door to the outside world, then these ideas from divine mind come down here into the subconscious, and when they hit the subconscious, there can be turbulence, because divine ideas meeting the limited beliefs, the attitudes, the unprocessed memories, and there's a kind of a collision that we call chemicalization. And then once that's over, then that notion becomes conscious. So here's the divine idea. I am a spiritual being. So that idea comes down here, and it's going to conflict with your idea that you're only human, or I am limited by X, Y, or Z. That gets purified out, and then that notion comes up here and becomes conscious. Up here, this door is open, and herein makes all the difference. This door is open, and we get here, and oh my, our notion of reality is taken completely from the outside. It dramatically overshadows. Here's the divine idea. I am a spiritual being. And you say, oh yeah, well, why is this happening? And why is that happening? And then it goes directly, you follow the arrows, and it goes directly into the subconscious. And that's where it stays. Okay. So that we have subconscious baggage with us. We're going to take this up again when we come to the widow's oil. After that, we went through the stage of Elijah being able to hear the still small voice and receiving new instructions. So it was a whole new mode of functioning for Elijah. No more killing of prophets and of trying to force your way, force this idea that God is God through force. He's to anoint, meaning to sanctify, to lift up. And he is given three different tasks. The first one, and he's told to go right back into the wilderness. Isn't that odd? He just came out of the wilderness, and now he's to go back, but with a new purpose for lifting up that materialistic culture, which was Hazael, the king of Syria. All right, materialistic. So once you come out from that still small voice and you have purified out, then you are able to project that new consciousness onto a materialistic culture. All right. And then he had a second task, was to lift up Israel, to anoint Jehu, king of Israel. Israel needed to be lifted up during this period of the divided kingdom. And then third, to anoint Elisha. And so nothing happens until Elisha is anointed, because Elisha is a higher state of consciousness where that still small voice is so established. We talked about his training last week, how he trained Elisha, giving him 4 chances to not go with him. When he found, here was Elisha plowing. He had 24 oxen, 12 pair of yoked oxen, and he was plowing, and he was on the 12th pair. And he threw his mantle on Elisha, and Elisha knew what that meant, and he started to follow. But then Elijah said, go back. Do you know what this means? And what does it mean if you are training a successor to yourself? What do you want from that successor. In this case, I will venture to say commitment. This is not an easy task to fill Elijah's shoes. And so he gives him opportunities at Samaria, at Gilgal, at Bethel. We're getting up now into the spiritual realms, and all along the way, Elijah says, hey, you can stop anytime you want. You could stop here. And the prophets' guilds along the way say, hey, you should stay here because he's going to disappear. He's going to leave you. And Elisha stands firm, and at each step of the way. And then they cross the Jordan, and that's where the Jordan, that stream of consciousness that we all have to cross, face whatever is still left in consciousness, and then come back. So that's a very interesting training program, and the ascension. And so he does receive that double portion of spirit. He has the zeal, which comes from the mind, okay, zeal, the motivating power of the mind, and he has this deep sense of compassion, which tempers the zeal and redirects it into healing work. And so, as promised, I thought we would read the beginning of Elisha's miracles. And this one, particular one, starting with Elisha's story, and then we'll compare it, because it's interestingly different from Elijah's time with the widow and the oil. So this is found in 2 Kings chapter 4, 1 through 7. Are you there yet? Okay. Well, I better read it just because of the sound. I would love to read it, but you can read it along with me. Now, the wife of one of the sons of the prophets cried to Elisha. Right away, here's a difference. It's a widow, but she is crying out to Elisha, whereas it was Elisha in the Elijah story who asked her for bread. All right. Your servant, my husband, okay, he was a prophet too. Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord, but the creditor has come to take my 2 children. Notice there are 2 children to be his slaves. And Elisha said to her, what shall I do for you? Now, where did we hear that before? We just heard it in the Ascension, where Elijah says to Elisha, before I disappear, what shall I do for you? Okay. Tell me, what have you in the house? House meaning consciousness, all right? And she said, your maidservant has nothing in the house except a jar of oil. Now, what she means is she has nothing visible, all right? There is nothing visible that she can see in the house except for a little jar of oil. And being a widow, she represents that feeling nature, love bereft of wisdom. Her husband's dead, all right? So, no wisdom. Well, a little bit, because she's got 2 sons, all right? She got 2 sons. So that's just, but it's 2 sons. Now watch what happens. Then he said, go outside, okay, go outside this consciousness of limitation, borrow vessels of all your neighbors. Now, empty vessels, he tells them they should be empty. These empty vessels are all the depleted energy centers in her body. Right? Empty vessels, and not too few. Then go in and, here we go, shut the door upon, so she went from him. Wait a second, sorry, I left out a line here. Then go in and shut the door upon yourself and your sons, and pour into all these vessels, and when one is full, set it aside. So she went from him and shut the door upon herself and her sons, and as she poured, they brought the vessels to her. When the vessels were full, she said to her son, now there's only one son, okay, so that consciousness of duality is now a consciousness of oneness. Bring me another vessel. He said to her, there is not another. Then the oil stopped flowing. All right, in other words, we can have as much as we can receive. All right. And he said to her, there is not another. She came and told the man of God, that's Elisha, and he said, go, sell the oil and pay your debts, and you and your sons can live on the rest. Well, now that's back to sons. In other words, unlike the Elijah story, Elisha has her do the work. All right. And what she ends up with is a consciousness of abundance that will always flow. With the widow of Zarephath, the oil would flow only until the end of the drought. And for her, she forgot the wisdom after, he provided the bread and the oil to last, but then her son was sick and she forgot all about it, and she forgot that. Okay, so it's like when we are not centered in the truth, we can use the law, but just to manifest one thing at a time. So do you really want to have to play every time you want a loaf of bread, every time you want a jar of oil, every time you want a pair of shoes? Do you really want? Why not go to the source and develop a consciousness of infinite abundance, so that whatever the situation, whether there's a drought or whether there's a famine or whatever, you have access to the abundance. So it's a beautiful story. So that is what made her self-sufficient. It was not money. When you sell, they rarely used money. And so it was a reference to, selling the oil, some goods, love. Oil represents love. Love flows. All right, so she poured the oil into these empty vessels, all these places in consciousness that have been so depleted from this buying into the appearance of lack, and I only have, a sense of limitation. And so when you pour that love into any situation, then it's balanced. There's thinking and feeling. So a vessel is this is the metaphysical definition of a vessel, a capacity to comprehend, appreciate truth. So that's wisdom, all right? Okay. And I would say, or you could probably take a guess as to which faculty centers had been dissipated. I would say for sure faith and understanding, right? Because she did not have an understanding of how to increase the small amount that she had. And this is the instruction of Jesus. This is the instruction here. The instruction was to go into that inner chamber and close the door. Okay, here's your diagram. You're going to close the door. So you've already increased your capacity to receive because you've closed the door to the outside world where you have gotten those limited ideas of what it looks like, of how little you have in visible form. Here you have invisible form, and she's pouring into these empty vessels, pouring love, oil, so that it flows and revives that limited consciousness into a consciousness of wholeness. It's a wonderful story. I want to point out a few things, and you have this in your folder, I do believe. The widow of Zarephath. It's on the back of.
That is the widow of Zarephath, right?
No.
This is the one.
This woman was a widow, but she was not from Zarephath. Zarephath was Elijah's widow was in Zarephath. That's Jezebel country. That is Zarephath. Represents, it means purification, Zarephath. And where Elijah has to demonstrate the law himself. Unlike in this one, he gives the instructions and she has to do it herself. That makes a huge difference because she knows Elijah can do it, but can I do it? What if Elijah isn't here? All right, Elisha. Okay, so he's guided. Elijah is guided to go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. So he's being told to dwell in Jezebel country. Right? So he arose and went to Zarephath, and when he came to the gate of the city, that's where you enter into materialism. Okay. Behold, a widow was there gathering sticks, and he called to her. This is, he's the one doing the calling, and said, "Bring me a little water in a vessel that I may drink." And as she was going to bring it, he called to her and said, "Bring me a morsel of bread in your hand." Bread meaning substance, right? And she said, "As the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of meal in a jar and a little oil in a cruse. And now I am gathering a couple of sticks that I may go in and prepare it for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." All right, she's preparing her final meal. This is bondage, all right? This is prison. So nothing, and she so believes in this lack that she's preparing to die. And Elijah said to her, "Fear not. Go and do as you have said, but first make me a little cake of it and bring it to me." So what do we have here? This is like the law of giving. All right, it's giving that primes the pump. Okay. And after, bring it to me, and afterward make for yourself and your son. So it's Elijah's faith, Elijah's understanding of the law that is propelling this whole thing. "For thus says the Lord God of Israel, the jar of meal shall not be spent, and the cruse of oil shall not fail until the day that the Lord sends rain upon the earth." And she went and did as Elijah said, and she and he and her household ate for many days. The jar of meal was not spent, neither did the cruse of oil fail, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke to Elijah. So it's two widows, but you can see the difference between Elijah and Elisha in the role of how they teach the law of increase. And so, Elijah demonstrates the law of increase, but Elisha gives instructions and tells her how to do it. So when you receive guidance from the source, you get the idea of how to do it. So it's taking God from, being a man to being spirit, and spirit can be accessed within us. Elijah is acting in the capacity of a man, a human being, representing intellect, but also representing wisdom. The widow's love representing wisdom, and she has a son. Now, the next story, do you have any questions before I move on to the second miracle?
Well, the learning is a lot, because Elisha instructs, Elijah does.
Right. He has to do
it.
Because his preparation for ascension is to understand and to demonstrate the law. Because he is going to, as Elisha in that higher state, he is going to have to instruct others. All right. Okay. So it's
practitioner, teacher, sort of.
Yeah. And also for Elijah, it's about bringing together those two faculties of judgment and love in a balanced way. He's not yet balanced, but wisdom, to bring together wisdom, to bring together an understanding. You really understand something if you do it yourself. Okay. I could tell you how to meditate, and I could say, now close your eyes, but if you're not doing it, you're not going to even remember what I'm telling you, and the instructions kind of fall on deaf ears, right? Okay, so we see the difference in functioning from that still small voice. In the first story, he's not functioning from that. He receives guidance for himself. And then he applies the law. Now in the widow, she does it herself, and then she goes to Elisha, and he tells her how to apply the law. Go and sell the oil. Mm-hmm. All right? But she actually demonstrates the law for herself. And then sell the oil. And then you've got this forever, and you've rescued your sons. Okay.
And the sons again, the two of them.
There are two sons, and then after they go into the inner chamber and shut the door, one son, it's like the two become one, because duality in thinking would be like, I believe in abundance and lack. I believe in God and something else. All right. But in the silence, there's only one. And then afterwards, there are two sons once again, but there is a consciousness that the seed of oneness is now there. Okay. All right. Because even in a state of peace, like in the case of Elijah, even as he demonstrated that grand victory over the Baal gods, Ahab and Jezebel were still ruling. All right, and so we can purify, we can do a lot of inner work, but who or what is ruling us? Okay, so she's still being ruled. She's not complete yet, the Elisha widow. Okay, because part of acting on guidance is to use it. You have to know what to do with it. How does it solve my situation here? Okay. So we can move on. I think first we'll do the Zarephath widow's son. She only has one to start with, and he is ill. And I probably should remind people that, even the instruction to go ask a widow for food. I mean, that's like if I said, go live with the homeless people and ask them for food. I'm sending you there, right? And you say, and your intellect says, that doesn't sound right. Right? So that was an instruction, because everyone knows that widows are really poor, really are not of any value in society once their husband is gone. Okay. So, she has a son. After this, the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became ill, and his illness was so severe that there was no breath left in him, no spirit. Okay. And she said to Elijah, "What have you against me, O man of God? You have come to bring my sin to remembrance and to cause the death of my son." She's blaming God. Here he has just provided abundance for her, and she's blaming him for her son's illness. And he said to her, "Give me your son." And he took him from her bosom and carried him into the upper chamber. So he's taking the son into a higher state of consciousness, laid him upon his own bed. Bed is another word for consciousness. You know, when Jesus says, "Pick up your bed and walk," pick up that bed of consciousness. And he cried to the Lord. See, she cries to him, he cries to the Lord. That's different. Elisha does not do that. "O Lord my God, hast thou brought calamity even upon the widow?" So he's still in a consciousness of duality. "With whom I sojourned by slaying her son." Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times. All right. To revive the energy in all 3 departments of our being, spirit, soul, and body, and cried to the Lord, "O Lord my God, let this child's soul come into him again." And the Lord hearkened to the voice of Elijah, and the soul of the child came into him again, and he revived. And Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper chamber into the house, brought him back down into this consciousness of limitation. She was taking death as a permanent reality, giving it more power in her life than spirit or God, and delivered him to his mother. And Elijah said, "See, your son lives." And the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth." All right, so she has to see in order to believe. All right, she has to see that her son is alive, and then she can stop blaming God. God caused the death, God causes the life. All right, that's the way it works. Okay, so that's that one. But Elisha, this is really a very different story, because this woman is not a widow. All right, it's Elisha raises the Shunammite's son. Do you have that one? You can follow along in the Bible if you don't have it. I thought I gave it to you. It's on the back of the widow's oil.
Oh, it is?
Uh-huh.
I got it then.
Should be.
No.
Oh, okay.
It probably just missed
What's
it.
over there next to Gracie?
Oh, no, that's Elijah. This is the meaning of the $100.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay, but we'll just go
It
to
is found
2
in
Kings
2
4.
Kings 4, 8 through 37. Okay, and so here, then notice that the widows do not have names. Okay, this woman is not a widow. She also does not have a name, but she lives in a place that has metaphysical significance, which is Shunem. She lives in Shunem. Now, I have read where some scholars say it's a mistranslation and it should be Shiloh, but Shunem fits metaphysically because it means double rest. All right. And maybe you can see this after we describe her husband. One day, Elisha went on to Shunem, where a wealthy woman lived. She's wealthy, and she's a woman, so rich in her feeling nature. Are you there? Who urged him to eat some food. Here, she is so full in her heart that she can offer something to Elisha. So whenever he passed that way, he would turn in there to eat food. And she said to her husband, "Behold now, I perceive that this is a holy man of God, who is continually passing our way. Let us make a small roof chamber with walls, and put there for him a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp, so that whenever he comes to us, he can go in there." So they're offering him, or she is offering, a place to stay. A roof chamber. All right, so it's up high. This is good. One day he came there, and he turned into the chamber and rested there. And he said to Gehazi, his servant, "Call this Shunammite." When he had called her, she stood before him, and he said to him, "Say now to her, see, you have taken all this trouble for us. What is to be done for you?" All right. What is to be done for you? Would you have a word spoken on your behalf to the king or to the commander of the army? She answered, "I dwell among my own people." And he said, "What then is to be done for her?" Gehazi answered, "Well, she has no son, and her husband is old." He said, "Call her." And when he had called her, she stood in the doorway. This is the doorway into this rooftop inner chamber. All right. And he said, "At this season, when the time comes round, you shall embrace a son." And she said, "No, my lord, O man of God, do not lie to your maidservant." But the woman conceived, and she bore a son about that time, the following spring, as Elisha had said to her. Okay. So she asks for nothing. They say, the servant says, "What can we do for you?" And he offers her, a little perk, good word to the king, or, something like that. And she asks for nothing, not even a son. And so they tell her, this is what you're going to get. You're going to get a son because that's what you need if your husband is old, and then he will die, and then you won't have any more protection. All right. All right. We used to act out these stories in CEP, and I can tell you, it makes it really, makes a real impression in your mind. And I remember this one so well. And the husband, this is Shunem, so he's like, and I can just see him with his feet up on the table and a glass of beer, watching the football game, if it were modern times. When the child had grown, he went out one day to his father among the reapers. Okay, reapers. See, challenges of the world. All right. You've heard of the grim reaper. All right. These are the challenges of the world. The son is grown. Right? And he said to his father, "Oh, my head, my head." Okay. What we would say is that is sunstroke, that he does not have, the challenges of the world are too great for this young, impressionable consciousness to be able to accept. All right, he can't handle it. It's too much. It's like if I turned on a light in the very dark room, and you would be unable to accommodate that. So we don't, at least at first, we're not able to accommodate the full flow of divine energy. We have to grow in consciousness to that point where we can actually do that. And now, here's what she does. And here's the father. Father said to the servant, "Carry him to his mother." All right. The intellect can never have the compassion to heal. All right? It's not possible. The intellect doubts and questions and tries to figure things out, but yeah, turn him over. He's kind of dismissive. Oh, this isn't my department. All right. And when he had lifted him and brought him to his mother, the child sat on her lap till noon, midday, when the sun is high in the sky, full light. And then he died. And she went up and laid him. See what she's very proactive. What does she do? She went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God and shut the door upon him and went out. Then she called to her husband and said, "Send me one of the servants and one of the asses, that I may quickly go to the man of God and come back again." And he said, here again, it's the intellect, "Why will you go to him today?" All right? Doesn't make any sense. Hey, it's neither the new moon nor the Sabbath. She said, "It will be well." You don't get into a power struggle with the intellect. You don't try to explain something the intellect cannot understand. So she set out and came to the man of God out at Mount Carmel. All right, that's where the contest took place, meaning height of fruitfulness. And this is where Elisha is. When the man of God saw her coming, he said to Gehazi, his servant, Intellect is a good servant if it's under the command of Spirit. Look yonder at the Shunammite. Run at once to meet her and say to her, is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with the child? And she answered, it is well. Does that sound right to you? If your husband was saying, I can't deal with this, would you say, oh, but he's really sick, and blah, 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 I have to go see the man of God? No, you don't argue. You just say, Gehazi is serving Elijah. Then when she gets to Elisha, and when she came to the mountain, to the man of God, she caught hold of his feet, his understanding, his wisdom. And Gehazi came to thrust her away. But the man of God said, let her alone, for she is in bitter distress, and the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me. Then she said, did I ask my Lord for a son? Did I not say, do not deceive me? He said to Gehazi, gird up your loins and take my staff in your hand and go. If you meet anyone, do not salute him. And if anyone salutes you, do not reply, and lay my staff upon the face of the child. All right, now staff is a symbol of authority. Moses had a staff. So here's the staff. But the staff is of no use to the intellect. You have this, to the intellect, you have to, it's like you think you can do spiritual healing with some electrical device, or or something. It's like, so he had no success, So he arose and followed her. Oh, excuse me. Gird up your loins. And that was a custom in those times, that if you needed to go somewhere, it was not considered rude not to stop and say hello and chat, because it could go on for hours. All right. So he's saying, hurry. Then the mother of the child said, as the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you. That's what the woman is saying to Elisha. She's sticking with him. She doesn't see that Gehazi is of much help. You have to follow spirit, not the intellect, in times of crisis. Gehazi went on ahead and laid the staff upon the face of the child, but there was no sound or sign of life. Therefore he returned to meet him and told him, the child has not awaked. When Elisha came to the house, he saw the child lying dead on his bed. So he went in and shut the door upon the two of them, that is, himself and the child. No mother, no Gehazi. The intellect doesn't get to come in. All right. The mother doesn't get to come in either, because she's afraid. All right. All right. Then he went up and lay upon the child. Okay. Now, this is what Elijah did in the widow of Zarephath, but this is different. Putting his mouth upon his mouth, his eyes upon his eyes, and his hands upon his hands. Okay, those are the three avenues of expression. Okay? You have to be able not just to have breath, you have to be able, hands are the organ of action, eyes, the perception of truth, and the mouth, this is the center of spiritual power. You have to be able to speak truth, you have to be able to perceive the situation in truth, and you have to be able to act. This is what a prophet does, warns the people, sees the situation, warns the people, and gives the correction. Okay. And as he stretched himself upon him, the flesh of the child became warm. Okay, so he warmed up. Then he got up again and walked once to and fro in the house. So he walked round in this upper chamber and went up and stretched himself upon him. The child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. Okay, child sneezed 7 times. What do we have 7 of? Energy centers, chakras. Yeah, so first everything got warmed up, all right, and now we see that he sneezed. That means that all of those energy centers were activated, quickened, as in the old days they would say. Then he summoned Gehazi and said, "Call this Shunammite." So he called her, and when she came to him, he said, "Take up your son." She came and fell at his feet, bowing to the ground. Then she took up her son and went out. So once again, we can see the difference of, we're at 8 o'clock. We can see the difference before and after the ascension, before and after finding one's guidance in the still small voice. So I will, we have a call-in line, as I'm sure you know, 816-301-6204. So if you have any questions or comments, and I'm going to have a drink of water.
I'm surprised that there's so much, I'm not surprised, that there's so much, you start and then that doesn't work and then you do that.
But see, that's the intellect. That's the intellect saying, now what's the practical thing to do here? I'll just take this pill or whatever your concept of authority is, and that will take care of it. That's the authority. That's what the doctor said to do, all right? And that doesn't work. And so she clings to Elisha. She is a woman of faith and a woman of feeling, and she won't go back home without him, okay? That's what the intellect does. The intellect serves us if it is ruled by spirit. I'm not going to bash the intellect, but as a master, it's lousy. But as a servant, it is great because it can set things in motion into visibility. In this case, it was not enough for Elisha to just say that. He had to go himself. So he's not quite there, but it's like a whole different story when it's not a widow, but a woman with a rich feeling heart nature, and a woman who married to a man whose intellect is really slow. Double rest. You're not supposed to be lounging in physical life. Resting is for meditation, and the intellect is for, you can't be lazy, is what I'm trying to say. You have to actually do something, faith and work. So she has faith, but she's a double. She's a Shunammite. All right. And so this is a different situation. Both times the son dies, but it requires a different approach. Okay. All right. So another thing that I find interesting is that, and I was talking to one of my students from Pittsburgh, actually, and I was saying that this whole saga so spoke to me as my story that then I began to realize how it was the same story in Moses, but I hadn't appreciated it as a Moses story. It was really, this was my story. And Moses, what happens to Moses? He grows up in this wealthy household. He has to flee, just like Elijah, because he killed an Egyptian who had been harming one of his people. And what does he do? He goes into the wilderness and tends sheep, which is another way of saying calming himself, guiding his thoughts into a quieter place. And what happens when he's there? He's tending sheep for Jethro, the priest of Midian, his future father-in-law. And then when he did this for 40 years until he was completely centered and calm. And then what happened? He hears his name being called. Moses. And he looks around and it's coming from this bush. Fire. All right, fire representing God. So God speaks to us in the silence. And guess what? He has to turn around and go back to Egypt, just like Elijah had to go back. All right. And so once I really understood the Elijah story, I could more appreciate the story of Moses because it's the same story. And he receives his mission just as Elijah received his mission. And then it's another 40 years because his mission is to lead the people to the promised land, but not into the promised land, which requires, it's like from Moses to Joshua, it's like from Elijah to Elisha. Okay, we each have a mission, and at some point when we discern it, make a commitment to it and complete it. And if we complete it, then there is growth that takes place. But I mean, the purification phase, of Moses, all these plagues, and the Egyptians are chasing after them, and it's like, you think you're rid of the past, and then wow, it comes zooming back in your face. I think I dealt with that a long time ago, and but that's a whole other story. But I'm just saying that the steps are remarkable. Moses and Elijah both see God from a cave, which is the cave representing that place in the heart, and he comes down with the law. And just as Elijah not only was the first of great prophets, he's the representative of all prophets. Just like Moses is the representative of the law. So that's another interesting feature of these stories, that once you see yourself in a story, then you see it in other stories as well. Same steps unfolding. And then after, then Moses is able to, purify the water, and he comes to an understanding that God is a healer. God is our healer, Jehovah Rapha. Jehovah keeps getting more and more names. Jehovah Shalom, God is peace. And there's altogether 12, and I think several of them are mentioned in Exodus. But it's like, so he grew in his understanding as a result, of the law, in his understanding of the law. Anyway, so that's kind of a sidebar. But I was thinking, there's still 15 more minutes if anyone would like to call in, but I would like to do one more, because there are so many fabulous stories of Elisha, and they're quite similar to healings done by Jesus. Instead of 5,000, it's only 100, feeding 5,000, but it's definitely worth studying. Naaman the leper, I love that story too. Yeah, Naaman the leper. And the axe, there's some that are unfamiliar, but Elisha is considered a forerunner of the Christ, and you can see that as he goes through his ministry. And then when a good character dies in the Bible, that means that that aspect of consciousness is integrated into the whole. So
it's kind of Elijah as the symbol of prophecy, the prophets, and then Elisha, and then Jesus. And then is it sort of, as far as law goes, would you put David in there? Would you go from Moses to David to Jesus?
Well, no, we went from Moses with an understanding of the law, and then next, after Joshua led them into the promised land, we needed these judges. Okay, the judges.
Oh, all the judges.
Judges representing that faculty of judgment. But judgment has to work. No faculty can work alone, and so judgment had to work with love. When judgment and love work together, we come up with David, a king. But when judgment was working with Saul, all right, the first king of Israel, we had this willful, egotistical king who tried to kill David. All right. And David had this wonderful capacity to play his lute or harp, we call it a harp, which could calm down Saul's mania. He was considered a little crazy, bothered by these demons, or whatever you want to call them. Anyway, so I guess we're not going to have any callers tonight. Most people are shy, but Bob is not shy, and he's not calling. So anyway, so let me make a definite assignment then for next week, and keep in mind this diagram and how here it's a way of visualizing the process, that the more we close the door to the outside world and then come back, just as our characters tonight have to go back into the world, which is where you apply it, you demonstrate it, and you integrate it, and then you go back into that inner chamber, close the door, and little by little, all of the attitudes, all of the limited beliefs that don't serve you are purified out. And recently, since I've had a couple of meditation classes, and there will be one next week, but oh, here's Mary. Good evening, Mary.
Hi, how are you, Eleanor?
Oh, good.
Thank you for picking up. Do we still have time to ask a question?
Yes, for sure.
Okay, well, I'm going to put speaker on, and my friend Steve is going to voice the question.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
When Elijah and Elisha take the son, the dead son, up to the room, which represents the highest state of consciousness.
Right.
Is it Elijah and Elisha's highest state of consciousness?
Don't think of the characters as people, but part of consciousness. So when Elijah takes the son up to his upper chamber in the that is Elijah has access to a higher state of consciousness. He's a prophet. He has access to God's guidance. But when Elisha takes that son, that's not a widow, so it's a whole different situation. This woman,
She put him there.
yeah, right. It was the woman herself, the feeling nature, the love that took the child up to the room, which she herself had decided to build for the holy man, as she called him. But that's not enough. You need the consciousness. It's not just a room that had walls, all right, which is a clue that it wasn't a because consciousness of the divine doesn't have walls. But it was up high. And that's why she decides to go and seek out Elisha herself. And then the intellect can't do it, and so she won't leave Elisha. So it's Elisha that goes into his room and walks around that room, and then, as we just talked about, enlivens all those energy centers. So does that address your question?
Yeah, I was trying to understand the different levels of consciousness represented by the two separate rooms. And I think you did. One was based on feeling nature, the love.
Right.
And one based on zeal.
Well, one was a gift of love from the mother, gift of love that she offered. Whereas, so that Elisha could have a dwelling place. And the other one was, it was also an upper room that was given to him, but it was a place where he prayed, where he had to cry out to God to get the results, whereas Elisha simply had to be there. So there's a different quality of consciousness between the two.
Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for calling, or letting Mary call. All right.
Okay. Back to Mary.
Oh, okay.
Hey, do we have time for another comment? Or no?
Yeah, sure.
The Bible commentaries, and it was interesting that the widow of the prophet was actually the widow of Obadiah.
Okay. Yeah, all right.
So it was interesting because Obadiah is servant of God, and he had, if you go back and read the text, it really fits that he was a prophet of God, and he had spent all his money on, the Lord's service, and here he's left behind this widow who has enough, I guess, faith to recognize the man of God, Elisha.
Yes.
And the whole miracle with the oil, the jar of oil and filling the vessel, so that maybe her state of awareness allowed for her to have this continual presence of God versus the first widow miracle, which you said like the oil ended when the drought ended.
Right. Yeah, it was kind of a stopgap measure with Elijah, but Elisha, it was a permanent flow, for sure. Yeah, two different ones. And when I think of Obadiah, I think of the one that Elijah met halfway, whose allegiance was divided between the man of God and King Ahab, and it's like that's such a common thing that people feel they're being loyal to their belief in God, and yet they serve, they make their livelihood by working for something that doesn't serve that belief. And so there's a divided consciousness. There's nothing wrong with having things, but it's like it's the consciousness of God's presence and the understanding of the law of increase that gets those things for you. It's a prior version of seek ye first the kingdom of God, and everything else will be added. And so
I had one more question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was interested in what you think the suns represent. I looked it up on the truthunity.net in the lessons, and it says that suns represent error thoughts. So these error thoughts have to die and be revived by spiritual awareness.
That's interesting.
What's your take on the suns are?
Okay, I would say because the sons are the thinking nature, all right. The first son that is sick and dying, he's immature, it's a child. And so the first one is a child. So it's immature, and children are not fully developed, and I can see how error thought would be there, but it's the mother who has the error thought in that case. With Elisha, the sons represent that dual consciousness, two sons. Dual consciousness, they believe in, there's a belief in that consciousness of God and something else. And so, yeah, that would be error thoughts. Does that match your understanding?
Yeah, when I read error thoughts, it really fit very well that both women, which are the feeling nature, contain error thoughts within them.
That's right.
And these error thoughts seem to die, and they need to be revived. And when they're revived, they bring joy back to the feeling nature.
Right.
And in the second case, it goes from two sons to one son to two sons.
Yes.
It's like you go from a dualistic error thought to a unified awareness of reality. And then you go back to a dualistic perception of reality, but this time it's in a way that serves you.
Right.
Not in a way that scares you.
Right, absolutely. Yep. Yes, you got it. So.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Great lesson. Really enjoying it.
Oh, well, thank you, and thank you for calling in. And the time is just perfect. So we'll wish you a good night, and everyone else who might be listening and watching. We love you, we bless you, we appreciate you, and we hope that you will join us again next week. But let's just take a moment of silence just to gather ourselves in that silent state and recognize that all Bible characters and all locations and all numbers are part of a grand landscape of consciousness. And so that we are grateful, and I will say God bless you and good night.
She is good,
Yeah. She is.
And what's her background?